All right, folks, this video is just for the people who weren't here on the day that I went over how to write the topic paragraphs. If you've already been here for this, skip this. You don't need to see it. I'm going to start off by showing you the rubric. The rubric and the argument builder are both attached in Google Class, so if you want to print them out for your own use, you can. At the top, you see the prompt. Second Industrial Revolution brought many political, social, economic changes to the United States in the late 19th century. Overall, were these changes good for the U.S.? So you're basically going to be arguing whether industrialization was positive or negative. So you'll pick one of those sides. If you take a look at the rubric, you can see where your points are coming from. This is a 20-point assignment. This is your basic argumentative essay or paragraph. You've written them for English and history and probably all sorts of other classes last year. It's kind of a big push. The only thing that might be different from what you had to do previously is the first box there is context. When we write history essays, one of the first things we want to do is to sort of set the stage. Where are we in history? What is going on at the time? And this is a completely neutral statement. It doesn't matter, whether you're arguing the positive or the negative. Sometimes your English teacher might call it a hook, right? Start off with a hook sentence to get the reader's attention and then bring in the thesis. The two things it needs to do is it needs to place the argument in history. In other words, set the stage, and whatever you're talking about should relate to the thesis. So if you look at the prompt, it actually has a context sentence in the first sentence there about the Second Industrial Revolution. If you just want to steal that word for your paragraph, that's fine. Okay, it's there for you to use. Thesis, remember, a thesis isn't just a statement of position. I believe it was good or bad. You need to have an argument in that thesis. And you also need to restate at the end. But since this isn't a full-on essay, I don't expect you to give me the full thesis at the end. If you just restate your position, industrialism, good, bad, as your last sentence to wrap it up, that's fine, because we're only writing a single paragraph, albeit a very long one. Most of the points come from support. I expect 4 reasons, not 3. To support your thesis. So 4 reasons why it was good or 4 reasons why it was bad. Specific evidence for each reason. And this is basically pull out some history buzzwords and vocab terms that you can attach to whatever your reason is and, make it look like you know what you're talking about. And then the last thing is just to make sure that your reason and evidence clearly support the thesis. So when I look at your reason, it ties back to the thesis. Your evidence ties to the reason. Basically that everything gels. More likely you're going to be doing this anyways when you're putting in the reason, but this sort of gives you a little bit of a cushion. If you give me a reason and stuff, but you don't clearly tie it to the thesis, you can still get some points. The complexity part, that's where you got to add a counterclaim. So an argument from the other side. Make sure that you explain that. And the last point, this is where people usually miss a point, is in the refutation. You need to rebut that specific argument. Don't state a new argument. Don't restate your position. You need to actually address the specific argument that you are using as your counterclaim. Okay, so this argument builder should also be attached to the assignment. This is sort of a pre-writing worksheet that you can use to build your paragraph. If you work your way through this one step at a time and then turn each part into a sentence, you've built yourself basically about a 9-sentence paragraph. And it's the best way to ensure that you hit every point along the way that you need to do. So if you look in the upper left here, we see the context section, what's going on in history. Sorry, that's the upper right. Upper left then is the thesis statement, right? What you believe, that's your position. Why is your argument. Right down here is your support, reason, and each reason needs to have evidence. And then over here is your complexity on the right-hand side. You only need one counter argument, not one for each reason, just one counter argument total. And your response down here where it says, however. And then strong finish, just restate your position. Okay, so if we go in close to sort of give an example on this, looking at context, we can write down a few things about what's going on here in late 19th century. Second Industrial Revolution altered the economy and society. And actually, that's kind of the bare bones of that first sentence in the prompt. Remember, you can use that as your context, right? That sets the stage. Then we go to the thesis. Here would be sort of an outline of a thesis for arguing the positive. Industrialization was good for the United States. Why? Improve the lives of Americans. You can read that yourself. Okay. So the first part up here and the top is just your position. You're arguing the positive. This is the actual argument. So you need to include both in the thesis statement. And then I'll give you one example of a reason that could be used to support the positive. Reason that it was good. It improved the standard of living. What's my evidence? It's mass production, produced products, made them less expensive, and that's going to improve the standard of living. Now, in reality, what you should do is start with your reasons. Start with your evidence and your reasons, and then create the second part of your thesis, the actual argument. So, what you might want to do that would make more sense than the order in which I'm doing it is to start with a position. You're going to argue positive or negative, and then start coming up with 4 reasons or 4 pieces of evidence. What are 4, vocab or buzzwords that you can use that would support being positive or negative, and then write an argument, a thesis statement based upon what you've made your reasons, because all of your reasons need to support the thesis. And so if you're working in the proper order, which, this is how a historian would actually work, they would start with evidence and then draw a conclusion from that. Your thesis will always be supported by the reasons because you use the reasons to build the thesis. Okay. If we want to look at it from the other side, arguing the negative, use the same context. Context is neutral. It does not support one side or the other of the argument. It is just a statement of where we are. So you can use the same context statement. I'll show you in a little bit. I use the exact same one in both examples. The position, all I did was change the word good to bad. And then I followed it up with an argument. This is not a very good argument. It's not very solid, but it's going to be a good start for where I want to go from here. So it allowed the very rich to exploit all around them. Like I said, it's not very clear, not particularly good. But when you look at the reason that I came up with here, workers depended on the rich business owners for their livelihoods. In the example being company towns, you can see where my argument came from. Now, if you use these, and you're allowed to, if you use these as sort of your basis, as you add reasons, you may need to go back in and change the argument that I've presented here, right? If you're adding something beyond just, the rich becoming too powerful, you need to add to your thesis. Okay, so modify it as you see fit. Just make sure all your reasons are supporting the thesis. And this one I actually did work backwards. I did it the proper way. I started with company towns. I was trying to come up with, okay, what are some reasons that industrialization wasn't good? All right, company towns weren't very good. Why? Because you were dependent upon your boss, and then from there, that sort of formed my thesis. Now, for your complexity over here on the right-hand side, you need to use an argument from the other side. So if you want to argue the positive, you can use what I put here as my negative argument for your complexity, right? This is the counterclaim. Others might say the rich became too powerful and workers were dependent on them, such as in company towns. And then you need to address that specific argument with your rebuttal, right? You can't just say, but I think it was good. You have to address the company towns issue and say something like, but company towns needed to exist around mines because there was no housing and stores available for the miners. So you needed to have, basically you're addressing that specific argument with it. Okay. So if you take this and put it into sentences, start over here on the upper right. With the context, that's your first sentence. Your thesis would be your second sentence. And then your support, Let me back up there. 3, 4, 5, 6. Those would be your third, fourth, fifth, sixth sentence. Using reasons 1 through 4, and put reason and evidence into the same sentence. I prefer to write longer sentences. It actually saves writing in the end, because if you divide it into 2 sentences, you end up kind of writing more and it gets a little choppy. So I would suggest doing 1 sentence for reason and evidence, tying them all together. Then jump over here to the complexity for number 7. So the counterclaim and their reasoning, right, would all be 1 sentence. Your rebuttal is 8, and then 9 is just a restatement of your position, not your whole thesis, just your position, industrialization, good or bad. So if you want to look at a couple of examples that I mocked up here, the top one would be like the first 3 sentences of a positive argument. The bottom one would be the first 3 sentences of a negative. Notice the first sentence, this is my context. In the late 19th century, the United States experienced the second industrial revolution, shifting to machine-based products and altering the economy. That is the same in both. It is neutral. You can use it in both the positive and the negative. Then I start into my thesis. Overall, industrialization had a positive effect on the U.S. That's my position. And because it improved the lives of Americans and gave the nation one of the top economies in the world, that's my argument. Okay, so my argument is that second part there. It's not just industrialization was good. It needs to have some sort of reasoning in there. And I start with my first reason there, efficiency of mass production. There's my buzzword, my evidence. Made products less expensive, which improved the standard of living for many Americans. There's my reason, improved standard of living because mass production made things cheaper. So I got my reason in there. I got my history buzzword, my vocab term in there as evidence. If you look at the second one, it's the negative. First sentence is the same. Second one, the thesis starts out very similar. I just change from positive to negative in my position, but then it changes when I give my argument, because it created a massive wealth gap that gave the rich too much power, right? Now there I've developed that argument a little bit better than it was in my argument builder on the worksheet. This is a little bit better definition there. And then at the last sentence there, the third sentence of this paragraph, is my reason, and I'm just very clear. I'm giving you a reason. I start out saying, for example, right? That's just indicating to you that this is the reason. Workers in company towns became dependent on their bosses as they controlled their rents and the prices of their groceries, blah, 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 blah. I've got my reason at the end. I've got my buzzword with company towns thrown in there. As we do these more frequently, this pattern will become sort of second nature to you. You'll know you want to start out with context, do a thesis. Thesis makes an argument. Give me 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons, counterclaim, rebuttal, and then wrap it up. And don't worry that like it's boring to do it the same way or feel like you need to get creative. In all honesty, most historians structure their papers and their books very similar to this. They start out with some sort of contextualization. They hit you with a thesis that they're making. They go on to build their argument with all of the evidence they have, maybe address some counterclaims that might come up or have come up, because they always have to defend their thesis publicly, and then wrap it up by restating their thesis. So it's good to sort of follow this similar pattern, because when somebody like me or anybody else, a professor or something, when you're in college is reading your paper, they will know right where you're going, right? They see that context, they see that thesis, and now they can see how you build an argument, and it makes sense. So we'll pretty much follow this pattern for most of the paragraphs. There may be some where I slip in something that you will dislike, like using some primary source quotes or something. But for the most part, this is the pattern that we'll follow. All right. The paper is due by midnight Wednesday. Good luck.